In this podcast episode, Robert Jenrick, a former conservative cabinet minister and recent defector to the Reform Party, candidly discusses the deep challenges facing British politics and society. He reflects on his personal and political journey, critiques the failures of both major parties, and explains why he believes reform offers a genuine opportunity for radical change. Key topics include the stagnation of the country, the broken political economy, immigration, energy policy, party dysfunction, and the urgent need for new leadership and solutions. Jenrick shares his upbringing in Wolverhampton to working-class parents from Manchester and Liverpool, emphasizing the values of hard work, family, patriotism, and small business that shaped him despite his parents not being natural conservative voters. Rising through education to Cambridge and qualification as a lawyer, he was elected as a Conservative MP 11 years ago, notably winning a by-election against Nigel Farage's UKIP. His perspective remains grounded in his constituents' experience in the Midlands and Northern regions, informing his political priorities on issues like immigration, living standards, and public services. He argues that the political economy of the last 20 to 25 years is fundamentally broken, with failures stretching back to the late 1990s. Key national issues include 2 decades of wage stagnation, high crime rates with 93% of offenses unresolved, an under-resourced military at historic lows, housing unaffordability, worsening NHS performance, and growing public disillusionment. Jenrick stresses that these systemic problems demand radical intervention and that incremental or superficial fixes championed by past governments have consistently failed. Jenrick explains his decision to leave the Conservative Party after decades of loyalty, prompted by his conclusion that it is incapable of genuine reform or facing up honestly to its past mistakes. He recounts attempts to push for change from within, including public criticisms of conservative policies post-2019 general election, and growing frustration as the party resisted confronting failures like mass migration, net zero policies, and planning system paralysis. He believes reform now represents the only credible vehicle for those committed to radical change. His time as housing secretary and later as immigration minister revealed systemic dysfunction, he says. He witnessed the inability of government to deliver more homes, hindered by overbearing regulations and lack of political will. At the Home Office, he found a department overwhelmed by chaotic asylum seeker arrivals, ineffective border control, wasted public funds on hotel accommodations, and criminal incidents. Confronted with weak policies such as the Rwanda Plan, which he ultimately resigned over, Jenrick experienced firsthand the sham of government responses, policies publicly sold as solutions but fundamentally doomed to fail. Jenrick indicts not just the bureaucratic state, but the politicians themselves, many of whom lacked clear vision or resolve once in power. He highlights a revolving door of prime ministers who, despite ambition, failed to enact meaningful change or consistently back their ministers. He also discusses how a complex web of legislation, including the Human Rights Act, Climate Change Act, and Equalities Act, and unaccountable quangos, hinder effective governance. Such constraints erode public trust, fueling voter anger and disillusionment. He reflects on the ideological malaise within Britain's political class, explaining that many of the ideas inherited from the Blair and post-Blair eras, mass migration, expansive welfare, net zero commitments, have proven disastrous. While some ministers like Ed Miliband hold firm views, Jenrick disagrees sharply with the policy directions they represent, particularly climate policies he sees as deindustrializing and impoverishing the UK. He stresses that reform's platform rejects these failed orthodoxies in favor of radically realistic policies suited to current economic and geopolitical realities. Jenrick views both the Conservative and Labour parties as ideologically incoherent, overly broad coalitions that have lost the public's trust due to repeated policy failures. He is skeptical of either party's ability to reform themselves rapidly or convincingly ahead of the next general election. This political void explains increased defections to reform, which he emphasizes must maintain both experience and fresh voices inspired by genuine patriotism and urgency to rescue the country. Jenrick acknowledges concerns that reform risks becoming Conservative Party 2.0 through an influx of Tory defectors. He insists the party must avoid replicating old patterns by integrating non-politicians, business leaders, veterans, healthcare executives, and attracting talent outside the Westminster bubble. At the same time, reform benefits from pragmatic policymakers who understand government and can help craft credible, actionable plans for radical reform without losing the movement's energetic and reformist edge. He discusses the internal tensions within reform's base, which spans traditional right-wing pro-business advocates alongside more socially populist and economically interventionist supporters. Jenrick argues this diversity does not preclude a coherent platform. Unlike the Thatcherite nostalgia still evident in the Conservative Party, reform recognizes that the economic landscape has changed. It embraces a mixed approach involving deregulation and investment-friendly policies, while endorsing strategic industrial policy, including selective public stakes in key sectors. This reflects an understanding that economic and national security interests require revitalizing UK manufacturing, technology, and infrastructure. Jenrick underscores energy abundance, cheap, reliable energy, as central to achieving economic revival and preserving industrial jobs outside the Southeast. He firmly opposes current net zero policies, describing them as destructive to competitiveness and affordability. His vision includes maximizing North Sea oil and gas production, safely permitting fracking if viable, advancing nuclear power, particularly small modular reactors, and de-emphasizing heavily subsidized renewables. Reform aims for pragmatic, economically sound energy policy rooted in national interest. On Europe and global geopolitics, Jenrick expresses sympathy with critiques of Europe's demographic decline, energy mismanagement, and cultural shifts due to mass migration. While rejecting former President Trump's disparagement of UK troops, he agrees with concerns about Europe's faltering global role and warns against naively cozying up to authoritarian powers like China. Instead, he advocates strong alliances, particularly with the United States, based on shared values and strength rather than economic expediency or appeasement. Jenrick warns of mounting public cynicism and the democratic peril if reform promises remain unmet. The stagnation under conservative and labor governments has pushed many voters to desperation, threatening social cohesion and political stability. He calls for honesty about difficult trade-offs and clear leadership willing to confront vested interests and the bureaucratic blob. Reform's mission, he argues, is to develop comprehensive, actionable policies with legislative readiness so they can enact change swiftly upon election and restore faith in British democracy. Asked about his record as a former minister when some policies failed, particularly in areas like immigration and housing, Jenrick openly accepts responsibility. He contrasts his willingness to publicly acknowledge mistakes with the broader political culture that often prioritizes spin and evasion. His resignation over the Rwanda policy exemplifies his insistence on principle and truth-telling rather than blind party loyalty or expediency. In closing, Jenrick identifies the precarious state of Britain's nuclear deterrent as a critical issue largely absent from public debate despite its significance for national security. Citing whistleblowers and parliamentary silence, he stresses the need for transparency and serious attention to defense capability amid broader challenges. This exemplifies his broader critique that Britain must confront its problems openly and decisively rather than ignore or sugarcoat them. While uncertain of his exact future role, Jenrick expresses his commitment to strengthening reform's leadership team and policy platform. He stresses that all reform members, especially former ministers, must not defend the indefensible or perpetuate failed approaches, but instead embody the party's radical reformist values. Jenrick sees this next electoral cycle as a defining moment, one last chance for the UK to choose genuine change or risk further decline.